Welcome to another of what do I say, Scott? Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I'm Scott Warr. And today we're going to explore the microscopic powerhouses that fuel every step of our runs. And that's the mitochondria. And I'm going to throw back probably 12, 13, 14 years. And Don invited me to a Monday run. And this was Monday evenings, and we called it Mitochondria Monday or Mito Monday. And the purpose of this run was to go at a very, very low heart rate, very easy, very talkable pace. And the whole idea is Monday's run was for us to build mitochondria. And I remember studying mitochondria back in the day, back in middle school or high school, maybe even in a little bit in college. But I don't know whether I really understood it. And I don't know whether I still understand it. I know that it's important in our metabolic performance. So anyway, we do this Mito Monday, and we were to build our mitochondria. Well, I don't know that much about it, and I was recently reading Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia, and there was a chapter where he talked about that. And again, it brought up this mitochondria and just fascinated me. And I thought, Don, we need to do an episode on this because it's so important for us as runners. So who better to come on and talk about mitochondria and all things that have to deal with the body but our favorite doctor, Dr. Mark Cucuzzella. He's going to help us understand what mitochondria is and what it does. He's a professor of family medicine at West Virginia University School of Medicine. He's a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Air Force. He's an expert on health and efficient running. He's a two-time winner, Don, of the Air Force Marathon and over 100 marathons and ultra marathons under his belt. So not only does he know a lot about medicine and the body, but he's actually out there running. And one of my favorite things is a video that we'll link in the show notes of him running at different speeds with the same tempo. Mark, thank you for joining us. Let's start off with this. What are mitochondria exactly?
Pastor, it's always a pleasure to be back, Don and Scott. It's probably been about almost a year, I think.
Has it?
Oh boy,
that's too long. That's too long.
Shame on us
that we hit. But it's nice to kind of nerd out and laugh a little bit. But yeah, because mitochondria, I mean, they're part of every living organism that uses oxygen, and that can be, even plants and animals, have these mitochondria that create energy. And so the mitochondria are the powerhouses that make the currency of muscle contraction, which is ATP, which helps us move. And mitochondria, they're about 10% of our body mass is made up of mitochondria.
Oh,
Every
wow.
cell in our body, other than red blood cells, which have their own unique energy production system. So every part of your body is made up of tons of these mitochondria. And if your mitochondria aren't working well, you're not well. Your health is compromised. And the good thing about what we talk about on this show is that the only way to really improve the mitochondrial function is exercise. So everyone out there in the biohacking world and the pharmaceutical world is trying to come up with some kind of pharmaceutical product that simulates exercise. And you could probably Google new magic pill that simulates exercise, but nothing yet discovered can create healthier mitochondria other than exercise. Now, there's a lot of things we can do to damage the mitochondria that has to do with what we eat, but exercise is the way that we build, create, and grow these mitochondria. So that's kind of the foundation of the mitochondria. We can get into some of the nuance of how we break our mitochondria and how we help build our mitochondria to be healthy for our health and our running.
So I got to ask you, Mark, should I try to get my money back for those electrical pads that I stick on my abdomen and turn it up, and so I never have to do sit-ups again, and I'll get abs shaped like a six-pack? That wasn't helping me?
No.
Oh. Okay. I'll send it back.
So first of all,
everyone's on Google right now trying to find this, like some little pill or NAD or some supplement that's supposed to help your mitochondrial function. But yet it's not there. The science is not there to go. You're better off spending your money on a good pair of shoes and getting outside.
So Mark, is there a baseline for a healthy person? Is there a measurement that we can get a blood test done to say this is how many mitochondria we have and equate that to some kind of a health threshold?
Yeah, so no real test, Scott, that tells us how many we have, but there are a lot of things that can tell us how they function in things we measure. So we can measure in a regular exercise test what's called your VO2 max. And your what we would say is like your maximum fat oxidation. So a percentage of that VO2 max is going to be how much of that are you able to use fat for fuel versus shifting to glucose. But the higher VO2 max you have, meaning how much oxygen can I uptake to create energy from, that means your mitochondria are working, because that oxygen carrying capacity, that VO2 max, is occurring in the mitochondria. So the bigger VO2 max you have, the better your mitochondria are. Now, these mitochondria are the pathways that we can use different sources of fuel. So all of us out there running know that we can sugar up and we can use our body fat for fuel. And we're always mixing these fuels. So we can adapt these mitochondria to upregulate the ability to use the fats for fuel. And that's a very powerful pathway to ultramarathon running, where you don't have an aid station every mile to take more goos. So we can change the pathways to upregulate. Fat can go into these mitochondria, and all roads lead to this little substrate called acetyl-CoA, which helps us create these muscle contraction currency, these ATP. So you can have glucose go into the mitochondria, and you can have free fatty acids go into the mitochondria, and they both share a pathway that makes the ATP. But there's a magic back door that, you said that mitochondrial run, but we can, so throw another question. So that little slow Monday run is doing something magical that truly is a mitochondria Monday.
So from what I'm hearing you, if I'm hearing you right, is we can produce more mitochondria, so we can increase the number of mitochondria, but then there's another portion of this where we can make our mitochondria more efficient, or train them to be more efficient. Let's get into, first of all, how what is the process? Can you explain the process of what we were doing on Monday's run, Mito Monday run? How was that helping us create mitochondria?
Yes, two important things on your Mito Monday. As long as it was at, like you joked around, it's kind of like almost like a coffee ride for cyclists. You're just out there chatting and shooting the shit about your life, your family, work, what crazy dumb stuff you did over the weekend. So every time we go out and walk, jog, swim, do anything that involves aerobic activity, it's miracle grow for the mitochondria. So what we do is we stimulate these capillaries. So we need to deliver blood, which carries oxygen to the mitochondria, and the mitochondria make the energy. So the little blood vessels, the capillaries, are the roads. So you got to build a robust network of roads, and then you got the factories, which make these make the energy. So every time you throw a stimulus out, like you go walk, you go jog, you go do something that involves movement, you're throwing a stimulus to make the mitochondria grow, to make the capillaries grow. So that's what you're doing. You're building roads and you're building factories by that nice mellow, 1 hour, 2 hour, is more optimal than 20 minutes when you're doing that Mito Monday. The more you're doing that, the more you're growing that capacity, again, to make, that increases your oxygen uptake, because you're building more mitochondria, which is your capacity to use oxygen. So those slower runs are actually building up your aerobic capacity and your VO2 max, without doing like VO2 max workouts. Those are like hard workouts where you're exercising at the top of your VO2 max, but you're building that VO2 max every time you go out and stimulate this. And there's articles going back like into the 70s, with biopsies and all the fancy science and cell chromatography showing the effect of endurance exercise on mitochondria. So this isn't anything new. It's been in the literature for almost as long as, I've picked out papers from a talk I gave recently that were in the early 1970s showing mitochondria biogenesis, meaning making them grow, just from exercise.
And it's crucial, let me get this straight. It's crucial that we're doing it at a low intensity, zone 1, zone 2 heart rate versus going out there and doing some speed work. We're not going to, or are we manufacturing mitochondria during both types of exercise?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit there.
Sorry, I broke up. Let me restate the question. So is it important for us to, in order for us to make the mitochondria, make more of these little factories, do we need to be at that zone 1, zone 2 heart rate? Or are we making these mitochondria at the higher heart rate levels, the higher intensity workouts as well?
Yeah, you can create them higher intensity again, actually adds a similar stimulus. But the goal of, but it's hard to sustain and do that repetitively for long amounts. But the magic of the slower, kind of these Mito Monday runs, is because you're building the mitochondria. So we have all these, we've all heard of fast twitch and slow twitch fibers, right? So the endurance runners and middle distance runners have a robust amount of what are called type 1 fibers. This is the red meat. And these are aerobic fibers. These love oxygen. And these fibers actually love fat burning too. And they're highly oxidative, meaning they like to use the aerobic pathways. And then the white fibers, which are the fast twitch fibers, have very few mitochondria. And this would be like your Usain Bolts. A lot of power, all glycolytic, meaning glucose loving, but they don't have, they're not robust in mitochondria. So the glucose produces a byproduct called lactate, mostly in these fast twitch muscles. But it can also do the same thing in this. So we burn glucose and we burn fat. But when we burn glucose, and before the glucose enters the mitochondria, it produces a byproduct called lactate. And it also produces another byproduct called pyruvate, which enters the mitochondria. But we're always making this lactate. And probably when we all were in high school, we heard of lactic acid, right? Like lactic acid makes you kind of rig, we'd call it, right? You kind of tie up. Now, it's not the lactic acid that's the problem. It's that lactate has a hydrogen ion, so you become your muscle environment becomes acidic, and your brain doesn't like that. And then the brain likes homeostasis, right? The brain will always shut down motor units when it's out of homeostasis. Like you guys have been out of homeostasis before on some long thing in some way, like something is out of homeostasis. So that lactate builds up when we're using glucose, but the red meat, these mitochondria in the type 1 slow twitch fibers, have a magic back door that can bring the lactate back into the mitochondria. So you can tolerate and you can clear lactate if you have a big endurance base. Now, through all history of sport, even before they understood what a lactate molecule was, what pricking their ears for lactate testing, before they understood any of this, the best runners in any endurance sport knew that they had to do 80-20, 90-10. Look at what Kilian Jornet does. Look at the Tour de France cyclists, all the best rowers, all the best cross-country skiers, all the best endurance runners, going back to Frank Shorter, Lydiard runners. They all knew they had to have this big base. They didn't know all the reasons why, but without that big, robust base of type 1 fibers to clear that lactate, you're kind of done with like one interval, right? Right? You're acidic and you're done. But we all know that when we're pretty fit with a big base, we can actually do repetitive sessions of intervals. And you can clear the lactate, your heart rate comes down, so you could do 8 quarter-mile repeats and maybe feel even better on your last one. But if you haven't done that endurance training, at interval 1 or 2, you're kind of done because you're acidic, you can't clear the lactate. So the Mito Mondays help kind of that buffer of the lactate that allows you to do the hard work. Does that make sense? Is it fairly clear?
Yeah,
It's complex science, but you got a buffer with the endurance fibers. It's non-negotiable to have the endurance fibers. There's no hack. There's no shortcut for that. At least no one has figured that out, without PEDs, I think, in my books. Maybe you all have heard of someone who just does intervals and is successful. Have you heard of anyone? Not like one and done, like over years. Anyone come to mind who doesn't do that?
No. No, I think it was Phil Maffetone that said, at least that's where I heard it, and I'm sure someone said it before him, that it was you need to you slow down to run faster. You need to build that base, and you can get that done by running slow on Mito Monday to race fast on Saturday. And I'm sure there's a period that you need to rest up for that Saturday race, but building that Mito run is important. So my question for you is there any magic time, or I should run at least for 30 minutes like that, or Mito Monday is there a prescribed distance that's beneficial? We should at least pass that threshold.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question now because everyone's lives are busy, so optimally, if you're going to do those kind of slower type 1 building, mitochondria building runs, you'd want to be out there for an hour, hour and a half to really stimulate that system, because you want to actually start to recruit the maximum amount of those type 1 fibers. In 30 minutes, maybe you haven't fully recruited those fibers. You want to kind of maximize the mitochondrial efficiency of the type 1 fibers. So it's going to take a little more work than just, a 30-minute shuffle. So and it'll be conversational, but probably at the top end of your conversation. As soon as you're not speaking in sentences and you're, 1 or 2 words, you're probably out of that correct zone. But ideally, you'd want to be out there hour, hour and a half. But a lot of us don't have that kind of time in our day, so you do the best you can. 30 minutes is good for your overall health and fitness, but if you're really trying to optimize your mitochondria development, you'd probably be better like 2 or 3 days a week at 60 to 90 minutes than just going out 30 minutes a day. But again, everyone is different. I think anyone out there, just do the best you can, but get out there for longer periods of time if you can build up to that, because I think that's where you're going to really reap the benefits.
Now, maybe for some of the listeners who are out there that don't have access to a watch and to a strap to go across the chest, and I've heard Scott talk about the test where you breathe through your nose and exhale through your mouth, that type of thing, or the talk test that you're talking about. Can you maybe teach us a little bit about this low-tech way that we could supervise our Mito Monday runs?
Yeah, I would kind of think of it, Don, like almost like, a heads-up display. In these fancy cars now, you actually got to look at the road and pay attention. But then it's, on the windshield, it like tells you, your torque and your speed and all this kind of useless stuff. And sometimes that can be distracting to you actually paying attention to the road. So I think some of those tools help us develop a better kind of heads-up display, meaning, okay, now I know, the heart rate, I'm supposed to be, at 180 minus my age. I'm going to start there, but this is how I feel at that heart rate. And then ultimately, I think you can just discard, all the gizmos and the gear and the Garmins. But I think it depends on if you're like a type A person or if you're someone who's a little more mellow. Most people who are type A, they always go too hard, and they're chasing their Garmin. They're just too tuned in to the instrument panel than the heads-up display. So people listening, they kind of know if that's them or if they're just out there, looking at birds and just enjoying being out there. And those people don't need technology. They're fine. They're not over-exercising. They're chatting with their friend. They're in a good place. So I think, but yeah, I mean, I think heart rate monitors are useful just to more like be a governor to slow us down. But at the end of the day, I think the talk test, breathing through your nose, for practical everyday living, is really, where you should be.
So we know that mitochondria are good for us. The more we have, the more oxygen we can use, and more power we can recruit for our muscles. They use, I think you said, glucose and fat as fuel sources. So there's some flexibility. I think that's called metabolic flexibility in the mitochondria, where it can use both. How do we make sure that our mitochondria are healthy and functioning well so that it can use both of those?
Yeah, and this is actually the $1 million question in the medical clinic. And actually, the mitochondria can also use ketone bodies and lactate. So we talked about how lactate produced by the glucose can get back into the mitochondria and make energy. So there's the body's pretty smart about creating energy, even in states of food deprivation, because we need to. And so like take the heart loves to use free fatty acids in their mitochondria for fuel because, our heart's designed to work with or without aid stations. Our heart's got a pump. So the key thing is, are you metabolically well or are you not metabolically well? And what does that mean? So the people that have a condition, and it's probably 60 to 70% of the U.S. population now, and Dr. Maffetone was one of the early just sounding the alarm on this, is the visceral fat in the metabolic syndrome. This is where you're carrying body fat in the middle. It's that pre-diabetic state. So in someone who has pre-diabetes, who we all are designed to carry body fat with us. We're a survival species. We're designed to survive and reproduce. So we all have a little of the wiggly jigglies, right? So depending on your genetics, and that's all fine. And everyone now wants to take Ozempic and the skinny jab for that. But those people are fine. They're not diseased. And you see that in a lot of ultra marathoners. Like these are not like skinny looking, elite, 208 marathoners. They're pretty sturdy people, but they're uber well. And they carry a little bit of subcutaneous fat. But when we carry that fat around the organs, right, it's that apple. So those folks have dysfunctional mitochondria. So people that have the pre-diabetes state, hypertension, high triglycerides, and the belly fat, their mitochondria do not use fat for fuel well. So the fat, that we call it ectopic fat. So the fat is deposited in an incorrect place, not just in the muscle and in the belly. So in a well person, a Tour de France cyclist, elite marathon runner, we store fat in intramuscular fat. That's a readily usable source of energy, to run ultra marathons. So we can use that. We can mobilize those triglycerides in that fat. It's like massive, huge battery right there at the muscle source, ready to go. Good to go, right? You can go out, you can run, you can have a little carb, but you're burning a lot of this fat. Now, the people with diabetes, pre-diabetes, those fat droplets in the muscle are dysfunctional, and the mitochondria can't utilize that fat. And it does not have the same smooth, energetic pathway. We call it bioenergetics, how we make energy. So that pathway is dysfunctional. So the condition when those fat cells break down, they create we call them reactive oxidative species, ceramides. So it creates an inflammatory state. They can't use fat for fuel. And what happens in those people is, remember we talked about that magical lactate going back into the mitochondria and clearing that lactate. It's a source of fuel. So if you can't clear the lactate as a source of fuel, the lactate levels go up and you become acidotic and you don't enjoy exercise. So the Tour de France rider, the elite athlete, will go out the door and ride hard, ride really hard, and their lactate levels don't budge at all until they really start redlining. And then these, when they're really recruiting a lot of these fast twitch fibers, when they're like, say you've got to, climb a steep hill, right? Now you got to go to the gas, right? You got to go to the fast twitch, produce more lactate. And if you're really doing that hard, the lactate levels can't be cleared fast enough. And we all know, like at a certain point, you're kind of done. But the patient who has the diabetes, they get off the couch and their lactate levels go up right away. And when lactate goes up, you can't use fat for fuel. So if you're training someone who has that pre-diabetes state, and again, it's not their fault. I mean, we're in this environment, we're in this food environment. They're gassed, right? They start 100 meters into their walk or jog, they're gassed. They're acidic, getting off the couch. It's pretty fascinating when Inigo Samalan and George Brooks published a paper on this, comparing, the elite athlete to the metabolic syndrome patient to like a middle of the road. We're probably all, kind of hobby joggers in the world of true elite athletes, right? We're out there, we're recreational athletes, but the metabolic syndrome patient is a completely different beast. And until you fix their mitochondria and you fix their metabolic syndrome, meaning, and that's the diet, they got to get off the carbohydrates, they get off the inflammatory foods, they will never really enjoy exercise because they get gassed, they get acidic, going right out the door, getting off the couch. So we have to fix them, nutritionally. Sure, get them to walk a little bit, but don't push them. They're in no condition to go do like a Murph in the CrossFit gym. Like they will hate it, and they won't recover. They're creating a lot of inflammation. So I know that's like a huge topic, But, to bring it down to summary, that the metabolically sick patient is a completely different animal when it comes to mitochondrial function. They're broken. And that's why even at a cardiac level, right? So the same thing is happening to those diabetes patients at the cardiac level because they can't use fat for fuel. They create this acidity. So the symptoms, we call it heart failure. And the symptom of heart failure is I'm tired, I'm short of breath. They get short of breath. And then they go in and they get these echocardiograms and they say, well, your pump is fine, right? They look at a pump function. So about 60%, 70% of heart failure, they have normal pump function. So we call it preserved ejection fraction, meaning they have heart failure, but their pump works fine. And then when we ask, well, why is that, right? And the standard answer, well, it is what it is, just because they just have preserved ejection fraction. Well, why? No one gives you the answer, but the reason why is their mitochondria don't work. They have heart failure, meaning their heart bioenergetically does not work. So it's not a pump. We think in the cardiology world, the heart's this pump, right? It's like a pump, and the pump either works or it doesn't. But there's billions of these little mitochondria in the cardiac muscle that have to work for the heart to work. So yes, the pump can be broken, but in most heart failure patients, it's not the pump that's broken, it's the mitochondria, because they all have diabetes, type 2. That was a long-winded answer to a complex.
Well,
and then we can talk about the brain, because the same shit's happening in the brain, if you have diabetes in the mitochondria.
Well, it causes me to come up with a lot of questions. So we mentioned you can make more mitochondria. The second thing is you can make your mitochondria efficient, or the other way around, deficient or not, dysfunctional. And what you were saying is that they're dysfunctional. They're using glucose only, not the fat. And you kind of have this circle. Let's say I am carrying a little extra fat around the middle and maybe other places I don't want it. And if I'm metabolically dysfunctional and the mitochondria aren't using that fat, the knee jerk is I got to go out and run more. I got to go out and exercise more. But those mitochondria are saying, no, I use glucose. I'm not using the fat. So you're saying in order to reverse that metabolic dysfunction, the only way we can do that is through diet. So we need to focus on the diet first to get the mitochondria to work more efficiently so they do burn fat. And then we can start into an exercise program. Is that, did I catch that right?
And it's not like completely binary. So certainly getting out, walking. So the people who have dysfunctional mitochondria, now the diet matters, right? So if you're eating processed inflammatory foods, but also if you're not sleeping, right? People that are massively sleep deprived, right? They're crushing their cortisol, their what we call the HPA, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So and people that are just massively stressed, right? That also taxes the endocrine system, which can affect the mitochondria. So, you've got sleep is important. We all know that. Hypervigilance and stress. I'm at the Veterans Hospital now and working with a lot of vets they're similar to cops, right? So it's this hypervigilant state, right? Like if you've been downrange or you're a street cop in a dangerous neighborhood and you're just constantly scanning, like your brain is just on, right? I'm sure everyone right now who's living in Gaza or Israel is hypervigilant. And whatever happens with this, it's going to be years before a lot of them dial that out when someone's like bombing your neighborhood. So like that's another whole area, because we see this in people that have cortisol, stress, hypervigilance, PTS, body weight, exercise aside, they have more metabolic illness. They have more mitochondrial dysfunction, because I think that like we're not a department store. Everything is separate. So you have to kind of fix the whole organism.
Oh, okay. It's not as easy.
Like what is broken? What is sideways? Is it, and like when you see people clinically, like when people are like in the well, right? Like everything is stress, hypervigilance. They're just in the well, right? They're eating shit. They're not sleeping. They're drinking too much alcohol. They're not exercising, and they're living in the basement, and they're like, what, why am I here? Right. And they're just waking up like, why am I here? What is this place? You pick one thing to work on, because those folks are in the well. and they pick one thing, like, what are we going to work on now, right? Let's work on the diet. Okay, let's get rid of processed stuff. All right, we're going to work on your sleep. And then, but yeah, so it all affects the way we store energy and we can make energy.
So I have a question about the mitochondria. How dynamic are they? How long do after we get them in shape, for instance, how long do they stick around? Do they drift off? Once they're there, they're always there? They just become less efficient? What's the lifespan, and can we replicate them and have more in an individual muscle cell?
Yeah, I don't know the exact lifespan, but we're constantly regenerating new mitochondria, and the body's constantly under repair. Like in each of us here, on the screen, in 180 days, every single cell in your body has turned over. Right? The only reason it looks like you is your DNA, right? So every cell is turned over. So there's good repair and bad repair. But that's the magic of when we put people to bed rest, right? Their VO2 max will decrease by 30% in a week. So that's kind of mitochondrial shutdown. Bad viruses, and this was part of COVID too. So acute COVID and long COVID was affecting mitochondrial function. And I had patients which were high-level athletes, and no kidding, 2 or 3 months, they were gassed. And I think now there's more papers about it, and we didn't know it at the time. They would get on the treadmill, and they couldn't do a damn thing. And these were people that were CrossFit instructors. So they were gassed, and they couldn't even get their heart rate up. They were just gassed. They were acidotic, because viruses affect the mitochondria too. So that's part of the true non-COVID, true long COVID of the people who, were well people, and now they're not well. But most of them are getting better now 2-3 years out. So we can say that once those mitochondria turn over, but that takes several months for complete turnover of all of these mitochondrial cells. And that's the good news, is it will, if you've eliminated whatever the culprit was. If it was an infection, most of the time we clear the infection, but it's left the damage. It's kind of saturation bombed your mitochondria, boom, and now you have to rebuild.
We have a friend that has been on our podcast many times, and he got long COVID. He was a fast marathoner, 220, 230 marathoner, I think. And he got long COVID, and he said he would get winded and couldn't walk around the block. Like for 6, 7, 8 months later, he was just having a tough time getting out and walking. So that's crazy that the mitochondria can take a hit like that.
Yeah.
If you're
and if you asked your friend Scott, I bet you they did an echocardiogram. His pumps worked fine. They did pulmonary functions. His lungs worked fine. The delivery system, the pump and the oxygen from the lungs, but at the energetic level, he was broken and no one could give him an answer.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
They're all fine.
He said that. Yeah, he said the doctors were throwing their hands up. They said the only thing they could think of had to deal with COVID.
That was what was. I mean, I didn't see his record, but probably in multiples of people like that. That was the issue. He can't make energy. He's gassed. He's acidotic. He's short of breath. Getting the mail because he's building up lactate. He's building up acidity. He's short of breath because he can't. His mitochondria can't clear that.
So since we're talking about that, and anybody that might know someone or has it, is it reversible? Is there a way to come back from that? And what's the prognosis of that, doctor?
Yeah, the prognosis, and Mark is fine. The prognosis is actually good because almost all of the people who want to be well get well. Right? We all know as doctors, there's people who don't want to be well, and there's people that want to be well. So these athletic people, they want to be well. They don't want to be sick people. They're not getting any secondary gain. They're not getting disability checks. They want to be out there running and walking and living their life. So what we see now, 3 years later, is the majority of these people are doing better. Now, a lot of them are deconditioned because the mitochondria, at least from what we can begin to understand about why they were so gassed, led to them to be less active, but then they've got to, rebuild the engine again. But yes, they can. I'm not sure how your friend is doing, but hopefully better. The people that I was seeing who had this, they're doing better. So these folks are doing better now. but I'm sure there's outliers who aren't doing better. And, there's a lot left to learn about this. But
Are there
putting like a
diseases?
lactate meter on those people, I think would be really interesting because, if you were trying to figure out if their mitochondria was broken, you could, now there's portable lactate tests. If they're building up lactate, walking the dog, their mitochondria are broken because they can't clear the lactate. So that would be, maybe your podcast, ask him if he's, because you can go get those online. You can go buy a lactate meter and strips are like $4. So, just to make a diagnosis, you could do that.
Did you?
No,
did
no.
you, oh, I thought you raised your hand. Mark, are there diseases out there that inhibit this metabolic function within a mitochondria that maybe we're more predisposed to not being able to build the mitochondria in a normal fashion?
Yeah,
maybe
medical
we don't
school,
even.
that's a great question. In medical school, you call them zebras. These are these rare genetic mitochondrial diseases, inborn errors of metabolism, and I can't list them off, but by the time they get to adulthood, if they were once a well-functioning person, they don't have that, right? Like that's going to be something presenting earlier, but probably the biggest one that's acquired is infections. And it's not just COVID, like, any infection can affect the mitochondria. So yeah, if people, have dysfunction there, they had some type of recent viral or bacterial infection. So we see that as not an uncommon cause of mitochondrial dysfunction. In cancer, so in many cancers, the mitochondria become dysfunctional and they become glucose burning, glucose loving, and they live off of glucose lactate metabolism. And it's called the Warburg, it was 100 years ago, Otto Warburg discovered this, the Warburg principle, which is these Warburg effect, where these cancers, certain cancers love glucose, and they kind of live in this glucose lactate acidic environment. And yeah, people have written textbooks, thousands of papers on, for these specific cancers, the way you starve them is basically a ketogenic diet. You don't feed them glucose. Now, cancer's a million different diseases. That doesn't go for all cancers. But there's a large body of cancers now that you can affect in a positive way by not feeding them glucose. If it's a glucose, we test cancer patients with PET scans, which looks for areas that take up glucose, and it shows up on an X-ray. So, like, don't feed the glucose to these cancers because their mitochondria are dysfunctional and broken in different types of tumors.
Speaking of ketosis, again, the mitochondria burn all the different types of fuel. If I'm someone that's a low carb eater or a no carb eater, am I doing a disservice for my mitochondria? If I'm not eating hardly any carbs and I'm just using fat to fuel my mitochondria, is that healthy for my mitochondria?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think if you're doing a long endurance event, trickling in, once you've made that, I think, Scott, you were calling it metabolic flexibility. So once you've trained in kind of a lower carbohydrate state, lower pace, you upregulate. There's all these little transporters. I think the fat ones are called CPT. So there's all these transporters that allow the free fatty acids to enter the mitochondria. So the body's always adapting. So if you train in that environment, not feeding glucose, slower pace, you upregulate these little transporters. So your body becomes really good at using fat for fuel if you train that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use, so that'd be like the electric, and the gas is the glucose. But yeah, you want to still keep that pathway intact, and you want to maintain stable blood glucose. So trickling in some glucose, you take, a little bit of something at an aid station, you take 50 to 100 calories an hour. That's not fueling your run. It doesn't even come close. But that little bit of glucose will keep that mitochondrial function going, stabilize your blood glucose. Because if you drop blood glucose during a run, like if you're just like all fat, all protein, no carb, and you drop your blood glucose a little bit, what do you think your brain says when your blood glucose goes low? It says,
it's a negative chatter, not happy.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we're in trouble. Like, stop. And there's actually 1924, JAMA published the first sports science article on aid stations and glucose. So the Boston Marathon in 1924 had no aid stations, no sugar, nothing, right? They just ran. And they were checking glucose at the finish line. 1924 Boston Marathon, and they would have a description of the runners. Runner looked exhausted. They would use all these words, prostrate, and they'd have the blood. These people's blood glucoses were like 40. You're like, holy shit. And they described what they looked like. They were done. And the next year, they put candy on the course. Just little bits of candy. I don't know what kinds, little suckers in the 1920s. And they measure the glucose at the end. And they were much better. And the people did better. Times were better, but they didn't look like shit. They looked pretty good. So there's something about stabilizing. This was before junk food, right? But there's something about a little, I mean, we all know it, right? A little bit of sugar, you know, like I've done comrades and, 100 milers, you take that little shot of Coke, just that little bit, a little Dixie cup of Coke when you think you're in the well and you drink that little and you're like, somehow you're like, oh, I'm good now. But you're still burning fat, like, because your body's upregulated that. That's like in the background, the big electric batteries in the background, a little bit of glucose just to keep your blood glucose going. That doesn't shut that other engine off. That is still going if you've built
Hey,
that.
we want to clarify when he's talking about a Dixie cup full of Coke, we're talking Coca-Cola, the drink. Okay, go ahead, Don.
No, but
The original Coke was made with cocaine, though, Scott. Like, no shit.
Right.
That's how they all got you addicted.
you know so much about the body as you've learned all of these things, and you walk around with this information in your head. Are you impressed? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Are you just impressed with how amazing the body adapts to and keeps itself in homeostasis and finds solutions to all the problems that happen around it? I could only imagine the more you learn, the more impressed you must be.
The more you learn, the more you don't know.
Oh, well.
Yeah,
Good point.
Yeah, you think, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Do you all know what that is?
Well,
You got a
Ryan
little bit
does.
of knowledge
Ryan's
about-
nodding. He's the only
Ryan
other
knows.
person.
You want to
I
say
don't know
what that
what it
is, Ryan, or he's in the background there? Yeah, spot on. So, like, you'll have people, myself, probably all of us included, when we got out of medical school, right? You got a little bit of knowledge and you have the utmost confidence to know exactly what is going on and to give the most clear, precise advice emphatically that is absolutely wrong. Right? And then you're humbled. You're like, we learned nothing about mitochondria in medical school. It's probably the foundation of probably every human disease, metabolic syndrome. And then you're like, man, I don't know shit about shit. And then maybe 30 years later, you have a little more confidence because you have a lot more knowledge, but it's not even close to that authoritative confidence that you did have when you knew nothing. And so if someone ever comes to you or me or anyone else with just such absolute authoritative confidence that they're absolutely right, I'd find another opinion because they're probably up there somewhere where they can't see what, you can't see what you can't see. That's, you got to, we all have made a lot of mistakes, with our own health, our training, like disease processes, seeing patients succeed and fail. So we learn from ourselves and we learn from our patients. I mean, I think as a doctor, we learn from thousands and thousands and thousands of patients. Like, if you keep doing the same thing and nobody gets better, but I read that in school, like, no, you're wrong. Right? Like, and then you see, you drop 100 apples to the air and 2 go up. And you're like, wait a minute, this gravity hypothesis is wrong. Why did those 2 go up? Right? I just saw something I'd never seen. I have to go explain that. And that's kind of why we like going to work every day, right? Like, I don't know, I like going to work every day. It's fascinating and people do amazing things, but they all can get better.
Our genetics play a great part of who we are and what we are. Is, to your knowledge, is there a difference between certain people that have, are predisposed to have more mitochondria, make more mitochondria? Is there anything in the cards for those that are a bit more, have a greater benefit in that area?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you look at, again, the muscle fiber types, type 1 slow twitch fiber, abundant in mitochondria. Type 1 fast twitch sprinter fiber, less mitochondria, more power. So if you were born in the Rift Valley, and ran to school every day, 8 miles to and from in your bare feet at 8,000 feet, That's like Miracle Grow. You already have a robust type 1 genetic system because of where you live, and you live at altitude. So you're every day creating a Miracle Grow environment to build more capillaries, which build more oxygen delivery, and you're building more mitochondria. So like genetically, you have a big tank to build those mitochondria. If genetically you have more type 1 fibers, you won't have, at least in the muscular system, that's the skeletal muscle. But for the cardiac muscle, yes, I think probably everyone has capacity to train those mitochondria just as well and build those mitochondria just as well. Cardiac rehab, what we have traditionally used and still use, is exercise. Again, back to first principles, the only way to build more mitochondria is exercise. You can correct the dysfunctional mitochondria by fixing the metabolic, the diet, the stress, the sleep. But to grow more mitochondria, I'm sorry, you have to exercise. I know that people don't want to hear that, right? Well, your audience does want to hear that, but people in my office sometimes don't want to hear that because they get up at 4, drive to DC, work all day, come home at 9 at night. Like, when am I going to exercise? And it's like, well, you need a new job. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's no way out, right? Like, there's no way out. Like, you got to fix that.
One of the things that I learned from Peter Attia's book was, regardless of your body shape or BMI, if you are doing some sort of exercise, you're going to outlive the skinny person that doesn't exercise. You have a higher likelihood. So exercise is the key. You got to get your blood pumping. You got to be moving, regardless of what you envision your body type or whether you're, what body type you have.
Yeah, that's absolutely in the literature going so far back. So no exercise as a cardiac risk factor blows away diabetes, smoking, high cholesterol. So if you don't move, your risk of not just heart disease, all-cause mortality is exponential higher. And it's way better in the literature to be fit and obese, fit and fat, no disrespect in those terms, than to be skinny and unfit. People who are skinny and unfit die sooner than the fit person who has a high BMI. But we're in this pharmaceutical-driven world where everyone needs to be a certain BMI, and if they're not, go get the skinny jab, the Ozempic or Wegovy. But I would highly suggest against that, for the masses of people who just want to lose a little bit of weight, because you'll lose muscle mass. Muscle is where your mitochondria are. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, can we talk about the skinny jab for a second? There's probably some people out there that have considered it or have someone they care about consider it. What are the pros, the cons? What have you ever prescribed that, or would you ever?
This drug has been around for quite a while in the form of different brands. They're called GLP-1 agonists. And they were developed as diabetes medicine. So when people have bad diabetes, these people are going to die sooner, and they're going to die not as a happy person with a glorious sunset. They're going to have stroke, heart disease, kidney failure, lose a leg. They have a lot, their brain, Alzheimer's. You name the chronic disease, they will get it. And this medication, now those people who don't have a break on their appetite, and who are bad diabetes patients taking lots of insulin therapy. So these patients are already making too much. So the more meds we give to diabetes patients, they die sooner. And that especially goes for insulin. So if we can help these people with a medication that quells their appetite a bit, so we can get them lower on their insulin dosing and get them to not, binge eat carbohydrate, that's probably a good thing for that group, because they're like sick patients, diabetes patients. They're different than someone who, and the side effect is, every medicine has a downside. So if my strategy to get you to lose weight and not eat is to make you really nauseated and not enjoy food, at least to me, that doesn't sound like a good thing for the masses or for kids, right? Like, my strategy to help you lose weight is to make you completely hate food. Do you guys like eating and like food?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. It's part of like humanity and culture, we would like to sit down to eat with our family. And if I'm nauseated all the time, it's probably not good for my family life, so that group, but their stakes are high. They're bad diabetes patients, there's some mechanisms there. In satiety, it slows gastric emptying. That's why you're nauseated. But there's a risk of a certain thyroid cancer. Now we're seeing there's a risk of what are called bowel obstructions because it slows down your gut, right? There's gastroparesis. So like it's not all upside. I mean, the way the medicine works basically is the downside. It slows your digestion down. Now, if it does that too much, you have an absolute break, right? But you also lose muscle. Now, if you lose 20 pounds of weight and 10 of that is muscle, does that sound like a good idea?
Not a good trade.
No way.
No, not at all, because muscle is the main furnace of glucose. So if you're diabetic and you're losing muscle, which is the way we're going to deal with glucose, at the end of the day, it's no good. I mean, it's not a good trade-off. And the problem with the medications, as soon as you stop it, they rebound because they start eating again, but now they don't have the muscle mass, right? So their disease process usually gets worse. So it's a perfect pharmaceutical drug because while you're on it, you lose the weight. As soon as you stop it, your weight goes back up. So that's the downside. No, everything is a risk benefit, right? Bad diabetes. But if you're otherwise well and just want to lose weight, right? You don't have the visceral fat, right? You've got, your mother gifted you some hips, right? That helps you survive the winter, right? That's not disease. And you want to lose that. And I could give you one of these meds and you'll lose 10 pounds, 15 pounds, but half of that again is muscle, but you're not sick. I don't, and it's got risk, plus it's $1,200. And if you gave this medicine to every person who now Big Pharma says is eligible, it's about 30 to 40% of the U.S. population now meets criteria, maybe even more, meets criteria to be on this, at the tune of about $16,000 to $18,000 a year for the medicine. That medicine itself would be like 10% of our GDP.
Wow.
So it's not reality. I mean, like what? Like, no, I mean, we have to look at big picture. That's like, to me, that's like, whoa, like we're a country of have and have nots. The patients with bad diabetes who probably really need this on Medicaid using EBT cards to get their food. Do you think they're ever going to get Ozempic or Wegovy approved through Medicaid? Hell no, like absolutely not. Not even for diabetes can they get it. So like we're creating this boutique world of healthcare with these expensive meds not given for the right patient. Now, they are used at times for the right patient, but the way it's now out there, on the internet and in weight loss clinics, I'm obesity medicine certified, so that's another board certification I have. And I'm kind of a little bit saddened that that whole field of obesity medicine, is basically sold out to pharma as this new wonder treatment. Now, I just finished a paper on pediatrics that we have submitted. And the fascinating thing is this GLP-1 peptide, which affects, like a hormone, it's a peptide that affects our appetite. Like, that's not a pharmaceutical product per se. Our bodies make it. Our guts make it, right? So that we make this naturally. Like your grandparents knew when to stop eating somehow. They ended up being the same weight their whole life. They knew when to stop eating. Like somehow their brain said, I just stop eating, right? They didn't weigh things, measure things, count things. They just stopped eating. So our gut makes GLP-1, and the main way we make that is with protein and non-starchy fibrous vegetables. So we make GLP-1 when we eat protein. So if you have a GLP-1 issue, you could get the shot, or you can just eat protein. And there's fascinating studies on a condition called Prader-Willi, which is a genetic condition that these children don't have a break on their appetite. The parents have to lock the refrigerator. And the only way these kids have ever been able to stop eating is high-protein diet, low-carb diet. So if you can stop a kid with Prader-Willi from eating with food, to me, that's first principle. That's telling us that should be first principle. But who runs healthcare in this country? What industry? Big pharma.
Yeah.
And who feeds us in this country? Big ag and big food. So like the forces, we can share on this. I just put a editorial in The Hill with Jeff Volek, who's probably the leading researcher on the planet in low-carb diets. It was called The National Security Crisis No One is Talking About. And so we wrote that in The Hill last week, and it's published. You can find it. I can link it. But this is a national security crisis because we're feeding kids stuff now, and only 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 kids now is eligible to enlist in the military. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. Like when you and we were all in high school, every kid, ourselves included, could have enlisted. We were all pretty normal, unless our vision was bad. But none of us would have been ineligible because of a fitness issue or an obesity issue. And we had video games. I had video games. It's not the video games. Did you guys play video games when you were little? Atari and Donkey Kong and some shit? Yeah. So we played video games. They just weren't as sexy and cool as the video games now. But we were just as addicted. Remember that first little Pong game? You'd be there with your friend and you'd be in front of the TV for like hours with the little Pong. Space Invaders. That was pretty cool.
Hey, Mark, in our last few minutes, I want to ask you a question that goes back to the mitochondria. So the mitochondria fuel muscles. As we get older, and 3 of the 4 people on this call, the 3 that are talking are a little bit on the older side or pushing the older side, we start to lose muscle mass. So how important in endurance running is going to the gym or doing some kind of resistance training to build muscle? Is that important for our endurance running sport?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So without muscle strength, muscle mass, stability, I think it's game over because, so I'm 50, I turned 57 in 3 hours. So I'm 57 tomorrow. So back behind me, I have kettlebells and resistance bands and I have a chin-up bar. It doesn't need to be fancy, but no, you have to. And the protein, so the only way to build muscle is you got to eat protein to the tune of your starting meal needs to be about 30 grams of protein for your breakfast. Like for the math, it's like 1.2 grams per kilo lean body mass, blah blah blah. So about 90 to 100 grams of protein a day, with the key protein being the first meal and the last meal, because at nighttime we're catabolic, we're breaking things down. So even if you're not hungry, unless you're trying to lose like significant body fat, right? The morning, start your morning with protein. Last meal of the day, big protein meal. And have a little protein in the middle. Most of us are running around, but protein, and lift things. Like one without the other, like don't work, right? You can't drink muscle milk and get strong. You got to drink muscle milk and
wait a minute. I need to make a note. Wait a minute. Keep going. Sorry.
You can't just, when I saw the ad in the GNC, you can just drink this stuff and look like, Lou Ferrigno or something. Chippendale.
Lou Ferrigno, you just dated yourself there, Dr. Mark. You just
The Incredible Hulk. That was a big show in the 80s.
Oh, I remember too. But as Scott said, there's 3 of us that are aged a bit, and I think you just
he was on PEDs though. I think he was on some juice. What do you think? That wasn't real.
Yeah, well, there's a few of those guys back then that did that in the 70s. That
he was like the Liver King. He's the modern juicer.
Hey, this has been a fascinating discussion, Dr. Mark. We really appreciate it. I think that I'm coming away with some renewed motivation to get out and do a Mito Monday run. Don,
yep, I'm in.
We need to recommit that. Maybe it's not on Monday. Maybe it's Tuesday.
Hey, Scott, I ran with you on a Wednesday, and I think it was very Mito-ish. I don't think we were moving too fast.
It could very well be. I think I'm gonna do a little bit better and trying to focus on building more mitochondria and then trying to make those mitochondria more efficient, more functional, and more flexible. And I think that you helped me understand that a lot better. So thank you very much.
No, it's been fun. I hope I didn't confuse everybody too much.
No.
Run slow,
I don't
don't
think
eat
so.
Junk food, get your sleep, don't get stressed out. It's good for mitochondria.
And it comes down to just those basic facts, right? All of this is very interesting. But if you eat right, sleep right, train right, and just have a positive attitude, many of these things that we talked about are going to fall right into place.
Yeah, they will. You got to be blessed with some good genetics and good clean air and some other things we don't know, right? So
yeah,
stuff we don't know, not get bad COVID every 6 months.
If you're like Don and myself, and you're a Dr. Mark fan, you can find more. He's the director of the Natural Running Center. where there's a lot of really cool information there. He's also the race director of the Freedoms Run race series, which just was last weekend. But we recorded this. I mean, it's being released, so it's like last month. That's a great race series with a full marathon, half marathon, a 5K, and a 10K. We'll include the link there. It's a great race to get out there and support. And then he's also the owner of a shoe store and a running store in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Two Rivers Treads. They do online and phone consultation, and you can even order shoes and gear from him online. So
yeah, old school or a small locally owned place, single box. I know the running shoe industry now is big corporate, so kind of like big food, right? Go to your local farmer market. That's your local running store. Would be.
Does Two Rivers Treads do a Mito Monday? Maybe they need to do a Mito Monday
night
run.
Runs, and they're never like, we don't do interval workouts from the store. They're always just group runs, right? It's not like Tuesday track session, Tuesday bar sessions. Just meet up and go at your own pace.
And
if you're around West Virginia, go find the running store. If you don't live in West Virginia, go find a locally owned brick and mortar running store and get in that group and maybe encourage them to do a Mito Monday run.
And let's not forget about he's an author of a book called Run for Your Life by Dr. Mark Cucuzzella. Well worth opening up and reading and learning more about what we do, which is run and live.
And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me. Are you still doing your own podcast? Is that still a going concern?
I haven't been doing that since life got just crazy with work and the pandemic. Okay. And so I haven't gotten back to podcasting. I'm trying to stay above water just with life. I don't know how you guys keep doing this. It's impressive, like that you every week you're still doing this and bringing on really new cool stuff. So good on you for the endurance of the podcast.
Well, I'll tell you the reason why.
I mean, geez, like 1,000 plus. Like, what are you at now?
640 something.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the reason why we keep doing it, Dr. Mark, is because we come on and have talks like with people like you, and we learn stuff in it, and it helps us become better runners. It helps us get energized about getting out and being fit and moving. And so, I think if we could quit podcasting, I may quit running.
You're going to the well, but that community and sense of purpose you're getting from this, Scott. So it's good. You're giving back to others, which feeds your bucket, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, Mark, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. It's a pleasure and a privilege being on with you guys.
Get your shoes, get some friends, go out and hit zone 2 or zone 1 and run
miles.